It has been a miserable season, but tonight Sox fans get a glimmer of hope as pitching prospect Drew Thorpe makes his debut. Let's discuss the potential of brighter days ahead next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan and the site expert of Southside Showdown, part of the Fan-Sided Network. You can check out my written content at SouthsideShowdown.com, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Smash the like button and also follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts and leave a 5-star review. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Well, Drew Thorpe starts tonight against the Seattle Mariners. He is the Sox second best pitching prospect and the 54th best prospect, according to MLB.com. What Thorpe's start represents is a pathway the franchise will need to take to get back to being competitive. Thorpe was part of an outstanding Birmingham Barons starting rotation that features a couple other arms that have the potential to put together a young, inexpensive, and talented starting rotation. I'll discuss with today's guest what Thorpe can bring to the White Sox future, along with the other arms in Birmingham. Then let's discuss what the rest of the farm system could produce. In the second segment, I'll discuss with today's guests other teams' prospects and what it would be, and other teams' prospects that would be nice to get back for players such as Luis Robert Jr., Garrett Crochet, and Eric Fetty. And finally, the draft is nearly a month away, so my guest and I will talk about the White Sox and what they can do in the draft. So let's bring on the managing editor and one of the best sites to go to for White Sox prospects news and podcast host of Future Sox, James Fox. James, how you doing?
Great, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, first and foremost, I believe you used to come on with Nick in the past. I think that when I first started, I saw your template name on there. And since it's been a while, tell me what got you into covering White Sox prospects.
Yeah, I think I came on with like Herb and Tanny when it first started too. It was crazy. I've just always kind of loved prospects. I've liked the future. I do it in every sport too. I mean, big like NFL like draft fan too, and I grew up watching the NBA draft. Like I always just like kind of thought minor league baseball was cool, and just like, you know, like these are guys that are eventually going to play in the big leagues, whatever, right? So, you know, got kind of like into the blogging scene late, like in my like early 30s, but I always kind of followed along with all like the major outlets. And then I joined Future Sox. So like Future Sox has been around for like 20 plus years. You know, I've just been doing it for the last like 7, 8, something like that. I think 2017, I think, was the first draft that I covered. But ever since then. So yeah, I just think, you know, I always find it interesting, even when we're covering the 30th ranked farm system. We find a way to try to make it interesting if we can.
And where can we find your work? Normally people wait for the end, but I think, hey, people listen to podcasts. They usually cut out early, so I want to make sure you get your money's worth while you've been so gracious with your time. I want to make sure that actually gets mentioned early on. You know, like the website, the patron levels.
Yeah, so the website is futuresox.net. If you go to futuresox.com, it directs you there. So that's just like our main site. We're doing 3 podcasts weekly. Me with my co-host Ian Eskridge, who everybody knows because he does all the video on White Sox Twitter, essentially. We do a live show Sunday nights that posts in podcast form on Mondays. And then we do a podcast called The Roundup with Elijah Evans and Jeff Cohen. And then we also have a big league centered podcast with Nick, who you've had on, and Danny Miller. So yeah, so that's, you know, it's pretty much the site. You can follow me on Twitter if you don't already at JamesFox917. We're Future Sox on Twitter, on Instagram as well.
All right. So Drew Thorpe, he's going to start tonight. It's probably one of the most anticipated starts all of this season. Obviously we had Nick Nastrini starting, Jonathan Cannon, but Drew Thorpe, a lot of hype. What can White Sox fans expect from him tonight?
Yeah, so I mean, hopefully a good showing. Hopefully he does what he's been doing in Birmingham. I mean, I know there's been like some questions about Drew Thorpe just because he's pretty unconventional. Like this is old school. This is like, a pitcher that like our fathers have like been dying for, right? Like they're sick of like these guys that just like come up and pump 100 and can only go like a few innings or whatever. Drew Thorpe's fastball is in the low 90s. He didn't lead minor league baseball in strikeouts in 2023. He hasn't quite done that this year, 56 Ks and 60 innings. But he doesn't walk many guys. The low 90s fastball is, above average still, but his changeup is plus 70 grade change. It looks very similar to the fastball. So like I've heard a lot of people that are like, oh, big league hitters are just going to sit on the fastball. And like, that's something that's easy to say, but if you're sitting on the fastball and it ends up being a change, you know what I mean? So this is a guy who probably, is pretty safely like a mid-rotation starter in the big leagues. I will say special assistant Brian Bannister is very convinced that this is like a top of the rotation arm, which is one of the big reasons why the White Sox like wanted him in the Dylan Cease trade. He's been traded twice this offseason. I don't think that part really matters, but yeah, I mean, like you said, ranked in the 50s at Pipeline. He's the 41st overall prospect of Baseball America. So yeah, one of the better right-handed pitching prospects in baseball. He's going for the White Sox. It's probably time to see him. And I think if he's good, there's no reason why he shouldn't be in the rotation the rest of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I know that the ceiling is not high. That was one of the knocks on him. His floor is obviously should be a solid rotation pitcher, and you kind of knocked that out when you're talking about Bannister thinking that he could be potentially an ace. There was talk, though, that he could have made the Padres out of spring training before he was traded to Chicago in the Dylan Cease deal. It was only a matter of time, but are you a little bit surprised that it's now June and he's up? Like maybe I was thinking maybe he might be up in like after the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit just because of how they've like slow played things, but I think it's clearly time. Like he's the next guy. Like they've taken a look at Nick Nastrini. They've taken a look at Jonathan Cannon. I don't know what else Drew Thorpe is supposed to do in Double-A. So if they're just like against sending him to Charlotte or they don't care about that, I think it's time. I think you're right about the Padres thing. Like all the pitching injuries they've had, he'd be up right now. Like he'd be in the Padres rotation, like trying to contend, in the NL. So yeah, I mean, who knows? Like it could go really poorly. He only had one bad start for the Barons this year where he hit like a pitch count limit that the White Sox have where it's like 30 pitches in an inning and they pulled him. But other than that, he's been pretty lights out. So this is a pretty exciting pitching debut.
So are you a fan of having a pitching prospect jump over AAA? I don't mind it because there's only so many bullets in those arms. I'd prefer AAA kind of be your parking lot for guys like Nastrini and Cannon, and then maybe your depth guys. I mean, some people though are still traditional. You got to get those innings in, AAA.
Yeah, no, I don't mind the way the White Sox are doing it, especially when your ballpark is the way that it is in Charlotte. I mean, the place is a launching pad. I don't know. Some guys just like don't accomplish a ton there. I think Drew Thorpe probably would have been fine because it's a lot of veterans that just like crush mistakes in the International League. Like the best prospects are in Double-A, and the White Sox have a chance to win the Southern League. I've debated with some how much that matters, right? Like whether your minor league teams win. And I've kind of leaned on the side of like, it doesn't matter that much, but others have strongly disagreed with me. Well, now they're probably going to win the Southern League. So maybe those people are right, So yeah. And it also, we'll probably get into this, but it leaves a 5-man rotation in Birmingham. So you're not really hurting anything like lower by having him in the big leagues right now.
I want to stick with some of these pitching arms before we have to get to the break. But the one guy, Iro Iriarte, he was the other pitching prospect that came over in the Cease trade. He's given up 11 earned runs over his past 2 starts after only giving up as much as 4 in a game in his previous starts. Should we be worried about him?
I don't think so. I mean, it's still an ERA in the 3s. This stuff's really good. There were some questions just about like reliever risk because of his command, but I mean, he looks like a starter all day to me. I mean, I think in a worst case scenario, he's like an 8th inning guy. Like if he just can't put it together or whatever, but the stuff is really good. There's no reason for him to, just like not keep starting every 5th day. So no, I'm not really that worried about that. I mean, look, Double-A is hard and they're really good. Like that whole rotation's been very solid. So, there's underlying stuff on Jake Eater too, who I know we're going to get to.
Yeah, actually, I do got to talk to him. I don't care if we're up against the clock, just because every time I turn on a Birmingham Barons game, because I got MLB TV, it's always Jake Eater pitching.
Oh.
I can never get Drew Thorpe on, like when he was pitching. And the one time I was able to catch him, it was the Jacob Mizrewski game where they did not have an outfield shot. So it's like, great, I can't see anything. But I'm always getting Jake Eater.
That's a terrible camera. Yeah, and if you follow our Twitter, Ian posts the probables every day. So
yeah. So I mean, and then I do check. I do try to follow you guys on Twitter a lot. But Jake Eater, it seems like every time I turn on Barons, he's throwing. Is he going to be a starter, or he kind of strikes me more as a bullpen arm? I don't know why.
Well,
just what I think.
So if he's a bullpen arm, I've always said that he's going to be a really good one. Like worst case scenario, like you could scrap the starting plan and just like make him a high leverage lefty reliever. That's awesome because he throws mid to high 90s. The one thing he's really done this year, he's lowered his walk rate like down to like 3.9, Ks per 9 or walks per 9. He's striking out 11 guys per 9 innings. The ERA is like in the 4s, but he's got a 297 FIP in Birmingham. I think he's improved quite a bit after a bunch of injuries. He had a rough year like last year once he came over. This was like one of the top lefties in the minors for about a year with the Marlins, and he got hurt twice. Like he's already, he's going to be 26 in October. So on the 40 man, after we make
young for the White Sox.
Yeah. Like after we make some trades, I wouldn't be surprised if we see Jake Eater in Chicago. There's no reason to not try it.
All right, I'm going to combine these into one question. Kai Busch, Mason Adams, and even Noah Schultz. Do we see them at all this year?
I think
the White Sox.
Yeah, I think you could see Kai Busch. He's been pretty good too. Very similar to Eater. The only issue is he's not on the 40 man. Same thing with Mason Adams. Mason Adams could probably hang too, but those guys aren't on the 40. You will not see Noah Schultz. Noah Schultz is making like 24 or 25 4-inning starts to get him between 90 and 100 innings. I do think we see Noah Schultz by midseason 2025 though.
Yeah, and the other reason why, Sox fans, if you're listening, why are we talking about this? This is the hope. And James, I'm going to throw you a fastball here. But isn't this the hope of how the team's going to be competitive in the future? Is that starting rotation prospects that they have?
Yeah, young pitching, it has to be. I mean, this is like the core of the system right now. And they're lacking on bats, but, they have a draft and a trade deadline coming up to hopefully like address some of that. But it's a lot of pitchers. And look, they're not all going to hit. Like, that's not how this goes. But I can give you 23 names right now. So, like, can we get 3 or 4 out of there? Hopefully so.
And you look at like teams like the Milwaukee Brewers and the Cleveland Guardians, young, controllable starters through lots of years that can keep you competitive. On the flip side, though, is it maybe better to go with bats like the Cubs did back in the day, or now the Orioles?
Yeah, so I've always been a big fan of like drafting bats. The problem is like the owner that you have is never going to spend on pitching. So like this might make more sense and the other thing with that is like teams aren't trading their young bats. Like as we saw like in Dylan Cease trade talks, like they got a pitching package. Like you talked about Drew Thorpe and Jairo Iriarte. They're just, we were all dreaming of Baltimore Orioles prospects, right? But these guys just aren't getting moved. So I think you just load up on pitching in the trade market like they have and in the draft, but now you're going to have to kind of shift your focus and add more bats, I think, like via the draft, because they're tough to acquire like via trade.
Well, we will probably try to talk about them trying to trade in the next segment because that's the rumor on the street. The White Sox want positional prospects in the trade market, especially since there's talk that the Sox are open to trading Luis Robert Jr., Garrett Crochet, and Eric Fetty. James is going to hang out with us for the entire show. So let's talk about what prospects the Sox can get back for them and some other White Sox hitting prospects next on Locked On White Sox. Cashback is as beautiful as nice weather as we go from spring to summer. And when you use Ibotta, you can watch your cashback grow with every purchase you make. Ibotta is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time you shop on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies to toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or that fancy dinner you've been craving. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, just add your offers in the app, upload your receipt from, say, Best Buy, Lowe's, Macy's, and more, and you get real cash that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Right now, Ibotta is offering listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using code LOCKEDONMLB when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONMLB. And PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members. It is the most fun, exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to $100 cash. It's one of the great things about PrizePicks. There's always action on PrizePicks, and this is the perfect time to try out something new as basketball is winding down. Make sure to try out esports this month because for every Wednesday and Saturday in June, if your lineup doesn't win, you will get your entry fee back. Choose from Counter-Strike 2, Call of Duty, League of Legends, and more. And if you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays, which increases your chance of getting a win, to getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. And what's great is if you're feeling confident in your selections, go with the power play, meaning if every pick wins, you win a higher payout. Minimum entry is just $5. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn on the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest sports stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And the White Sox take on the Seattle Mariners in Game 2. It is Drew Thorpe's debut tonight. First pitch is at 8:40 p.m. Central. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with the SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And welcome back into Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter, and thank you for making the show your first listen. A lot of great White Sox podcasts out there, like Future Sox. And I just hope I'm the first one you take in. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. Smash the like button and also follow or subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcast and leave a 5-star review. And I got James Fox from Future Sox. He has the Future Sox podcast. You guys got a YouTube channel, right?
We do have a YouTube channel, yes.
Make sure you guys subscribe to that YouTube channel and smash the like button as well. So, James, when will we see the Sox top prospect, Colson Montgomery, make his professional debut?
Probably second half of this season at some point. I mean, he's scuffled a bit in Charlotte, and he had a rough start, and then he started to pick it up in May, and he struggled a little bit, since then. So I don't think they're in any rush to get him up here, but I do think, after Paul DeJong, some of these guys get moved. He starts to play a little bit better in Charlotte. We probably see him to end this season, I would imagine.
So is he going to reach his potential at the big leagues, or is he, say, Paul DeJong? The reason why I bring it up is just power hitting guy, that type of stuff. And Paul DeJong's had a decent career, but
yeah. So he walks a lot more than Paul DeJong. He's got really good plate patience. So I don't know necessarily, there are hit tool questions on Colson Montgomery, and there's been, just questions on bat speed, stuff like that. But he's got a really good eye and he's got a lot of power. So, even if it's he stays at shortstop, but it's 20 to 30 homers and and a bunch of walks, right, with a low average, I think that's pretty good.
So how's Brian Ramos doing since he's gone down to Charlotte?
Just okay. Hit his first homer the other night. I just think it's important to get some of that experience on the position side. I said the opposite for the pitchers, obviously, but I think there's some veteran pitchers in AAA where it helps to see more breaking stuff like that. So I think Brian Ramos will be back at some point, and he probably closes out the year as well in Chicago.
All right, so James, speaking of Sox machine, said on 670 The Score last week, the Sox are looking for positional prospects close to the majors. So you're talking AA, AAA. There are pros and cons to that. The con being, the con that you said on the last segment, it's kind of hard to get those guys. Also, the con being you might have to settle for lower ceiling players. Is that a good idea for the Sox to pursue?
I think it depends on like for who it is, right? Like if you want that for Michael Kopech or Eric Fetty, like I think that's fine. Like you're trying to like fit a window that's like the next 2 years. I firmly believe though that if you're trading a guy like Garrett Crochet or Luis Robert, you have to take the best package. I mean, if you look at a team like Seattle, I think they're the best fit for Luis Robert if the White Sox decided to do that, because it's just all position players, but a lot of them are really young, and I feel like it would make many fans uncomfortable just because it's like a lot of recent high school picks and stuff. But that's the type of team that actually like has enough to get that sort of trade done, I think.
Yeah, and I talked about it on yesterday's show. They would actually be able to offer something similar to Bob Nightingale's reporting that the Sox want the same deal for Luis Robert Jr. that the Nationals got for the Padres for Juan Soto. So you're almost talking about 6 players. They've got like 3 guys that are pretty much at the major league level that they're still considered prospects. But then their number 1 prospect obviously is at Double-A, as you said, little young, younger, but he's getting closer to there. And then the other one, the number 3 though, is I believe a low A player or that. But they would still be I think the ideal trade partner too, as they can also maybe offer up a pitching arm as well.
Yeah, I just don't think they're going to do it. And I've been pretty steadfast on this. I don't think they're going to trade Luis Robert or Garrett Crochet. And it's not because they don't want to. Like, I think they would if they get everything they want. I don't think there's many teams in baseball that could trade for Luis Robert if they wanted to. And those teams, I just don't know if they will, because it's going to cost so much. Like, it's 3.5 years of Luis Robert. It is a similar package to Juan Soto. Like, people have told me it's not, but that was 2.5 years of Juan Soto, who's the better player for sure and younger. But I mean, Luis Robert plays center field. So there's just, like the White Sox are not going to do that. Like, I've even gone as far as to say, like, if they trade Luis Robert, I think we're going to like the deal, because I think somebody like went nuts and and paid a ton. I don't think they're looking to dump Luis Robert.
Any scratch off prospects out there that the Sox could get back for DeYoung or say Tommy Pham?
I'm sure. I mean, nobody that I would know like by name, but I mean the reliever that they picked up from Texas for Robbie Grossman, like that's a great trade. Like, that guy might be in your bullpen to end the year if he's anything. I mean, you got him for nothing. Like, you signed Robbie Grossman late in spring for no reason, and you turned him into something. Like, if they do similar for Tommy Pham and Chris Flexen and Paul DeYoung and some of these other guys, like, I think that's a win. And obviously I think it's going to be a super active deadline where fans are like really interested, because I think there's going to be a lot of Robert and Crochet stuff. I just don't think they're actually going to get traded. I think the biggest guy will probably be Eric Fetty. I think he brings back quite a bit. Like, he's been pretty good and he's cheap next year. So if Eric Fetty brings back a top 100 prospect, like, nobody should be that surprised. I also think the return for Michael Kopech is going to surprise some people too, because Bruce Levine reported on 670 this weekend there's 7 to 8 teams in on Michael Kopech. I know one of those teams is the Orioles. I just think like the Michael Kopech that we've watched for years, like, isn't the Michael Kopech that teams think that they're going to get, right? They see the explosive fastball slider combo at the back of a bullpen, and they just think that their pitching infrastructure is going to fix a guy. So I think he brings back more than people think too.
Well, yeah, and especially it's just a matter of, dude, throw your secondary pitch a little bit more. You don't need to be throwing, gas every time you're out there. Well, the MLB Draft Combine is next week, and the Sox have the number 5 pick in the draft on July 14th. Let's talk about who the Sox are targeting in the draft next on Locked On White Sox. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $200 you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Confident that Drew Thorpe is going to dominate and will help pitch the Sox to victory? Hey, the Sox money line is plus 194. And you want to do a parlay with the NBA Finals right now? FanDuel has a parlay where if a $10 wager on Jason Tatum and Luka Doncic each getting 10 assists and 10 rebounds, that'll pay out $406.96. Here's a parlay that might mean a boring game, but it'll mean some nice winnings. They got Jason Tatum scoring under 25.5 points and Jaylen Brown under 21.5. Kyrie Irving under 23.5, and Luka under 32.5. You throw a $10 wager on that, that's going to net you $120.02 if it hits. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And the White Sox take on the Seattle Mariners in Game 2. It is Drew Thorpe's debut tonight. First pitch is at 8:40 p.m. Central. Catch every pitch of the White Sox hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search White Sox. And I have James Fox on from Future Sox. We're talking about basically the brighter days ahead for the White Sox because right now the present is just gosh awful, but thankfully Drew Thorpe is making his start. And the Sox have the number 5 pick in next month's draft. I believe that this is a pick that they need to hit on, especially since they're not going to have a top 10 pick next year for being really awful. So where do you think the Sox are leaning right now?
I don't think they know. I think there's 10 guys in the mix. I don't know how closely you've been following, but there's 2 big pitchers at the top and Chase Burns out of Wake Forest, and then Hagen Smith at Arkansas. I think the top picks, Travis Pizzana, Charlie Condon, I think those guys are probably going to be off the board. But I mean, either of those 2 pitchers, there's 2 prep guys, Bryce Rayner, shortstop out of California, and then Mississippi's Connor Griffin. He's a young high schooler. I think those 2 guys are definitely in the mix. Jack Caglianone from Florida likely won't pitch in the big leagues. He's just going to be like a left-handed slugger again, but he's a first baseman. I'm just not a big fan of that, but there have been some links like between the White Sox and him. And then one of the guys that seems like he might be a wild card, JJ Weatherholt, shortstop out of West Virginia. He had some 1-1 love like early in the offseason. A lot of people thought he was the perfect Cleveland Guardian, but he was hurt for most of the year. He was back playing shortstop towards the end. So I do think, I don't know that we're going to have a really good grasp on it until it happens. I think money will play into it for sure. So this is an area where the White Sox do typically spend quite a bit of money. They spend their 5% overage. But look, with a $15 million bonus pool, if you think 3 players are the same, on your board, you're going to try to take the cheapest one and save money to use in the second round, the third round, the fourth round, stuff like that. So, it could come down to a mix of 3 or 4 guys. And if there's a guy like Connor Griffin from Mississippi who knows that he's not going to go until 10th otherwise, he might take a cut from that 7.3 in the first round where you sign him for 6.5, save some money and move along. But yeah, I think what happens in front of them will heavily determine what they do. I've heard them linked to the 2 prep guys a lot, but I'm sure there's a college guy or 2 that they wouldn't pass on. I just don't know who that is at this point.
Yeah, I believe Jim Callis in his mock draft when I was doing some prep work for you. I was going to butcher his name. I think
Jack Caglianone.
Yeah, he's the one. Does he strike you as maybe? Because I'm with you. I'm a big believer. I would never draft a first baseman unless it's somewhere down at the end of the draft. I'm going to use the international market to get my first baseman, but unless they reach this standard, Frank Thomas or Prince Fielder, guys that are just either, just monsters, guys that can hit for power. Does he reach that standard at all?
Yeah, he's got huge power. I mean, massive raw power, but I mean, it's a lot of chase too. He's cut down on his strikeouts in college, but it's a heavy chase rate. I'm just not that interested in first base because I think you can find a guy. The next time you're good, sign a free agent first baseman. Andrew Vaughn was supposed to be this guy. He's not. Spencer Torkelson has struggled back in the minors. Nolan Shanuel has gone high. Brendan McKay went to the Rays. I am just not a fan of this that high when there's shortstops and center fielders and potential number 1 starters on the board. Do that instead.
Oh man, you're preaching to the choir. I mean, and what I mean by Frank Thomas, Prince Fielder too, I mean guys that really studied the art of hitting or grew up around hitting and really developed into 50 plus homer guys or a Hall of Famer in Frank Thomas. If they don't reach that standard to me, I don't want anything to do with them. So what has been the draft strategy under scouting director Mike Shirley? Because a lot of people really think it's going to be Chris Getz. Mike Shirley's the guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now there's been all sorts of wacky stories about the draft room where Kenny comes in and makes a decision, or obviously Rick Hahn was the GM. He had a lot of influence. Jeremy Haber as the assistant GM had a lot of influence. Mike Shirley loves high school players. He's drafted a ton of pitching because he understands that it's just like an arms race right now. Like you just need as many pitchers as possible. And his staff, he's an Indiana guy. So he also really likes local players and Midwest players. So Colson Montgomery was from, small town Indiana. Noah Schultz is from Oswego here in Illinois. So his first pick was Garrett Crochet. Mike Shirley's 4 first-rounders look pretty solid right now. I mean, Garrett Crochet looks awesome. Colson Montgomery and Noah Schultz actually obviously like have to prove it in the big leagues, right? But they're both top 30 prospects in baseball pretty much everywhere. And then a pick that like wasn't universally praised was Jacob Gonzalez at 15 last year. But I mean, he's had a pretty solid year where he looks like he's on a big league trajectory too, as soon as maybe like mid-season next year playing on your middle infield. So,
yeah, especially after that, remember he gave everybody a scare, and now he's having a really solid year at Birmingham.
Yeah, they've done a really good job. If Mike Shirley's unencumbered, I think they're gonna do very well on this draft. I mean, they've done things where they haven't really been afraid of Tommy John surgeries. It hasn't worked out a ton with like a Peyton Pallette, but with Grant Taylor, I mean, Grant Taylor might be the 3rd best pitching prospect in the organization behind Noah Schultz and Drew Thorpe. That's how good this guy is. I mean, he's throwing 100, pitching in canny. Looks like a workhorse starter. He was a 2nd rounder out of LSU last year. There were lots of reports that Grant Taylor was going to be top 20, top 25 pick before he blew out his elbow. Like, so, the White Sox took him in the 50s last year. That's pretty good. I do think this year, though, with the extra draft pick, they have their pick at 5, they pick at 43, they pick again at 68, and again at 78. I think it's an opportunity to load up on position players if you want to. So I'm curious to see how they approach that.
Yeah. So for me, I live in a dream world where round 1 through 3, I'd be just doing position players up the middle, unless again there's an exceptional pitcher or a first baseman who is like Frank Thomas or Prince Fielder. Then I'm loading up on pitching in rounds 4 through 8. And hopefully I can get some of these guys underslotted so I can steal a potential first rounder in the later rounds. What would your draft strategy be if James Fox is running the draft room?
So this year, I think it's different than most years. I love taking prep guys and up the middle guys. So I would generally, depending on where I'm picking in round 1, I would probably take like a prep position player that plays up the middle, shortstop, center field. And then I like loading up on college pitching in like rounds 2, 3, and 4, actually, just because I think there's a lot of value to be had in those rounds. And then I think if you're going to take a shot on high school pitching, I like doing it a little bit later, like round 5, round 6, grab a guy instead of, because when you do it in round 2 or round 3 and the guy busts, it's like really tough because you like would really like to get something out of those picks. What the White Sox did last year where, they underslotted Jacob Gonzalez a little bit in round 1, but then they went over to sign George Wolkow and Christian Opper, who was a lefty, out of Florida Gulf Coast College, who was a Wisconsin born like southpaw. I like doing that because you just like save a little bit of money to spend it later without punting like the rest of your draft. They still got pretty good players like in rounds 1 through 10.
So when you talk about underslotting it, yeah, people might be listening to this like, we're going to get a bad player, but really that is one of the differences in Major League Baseball compared to the NFL and the NBA draft. What disclaimer would you give to the regular fan about the MLB draft that is not like the NBA or the NFL draft?
Yeah, so the one
huge disclaimer.
So I think the one thing I would say is the goal like isn't necessary to get the best player available like in every round or even in the first round. It's to get as much talent as you can get possible like within your bonus pool. So they have $15.3 million to spend. 7.3 of that comes with the first rounder, right? But say you spend just say 6.3, right? You draft one of these high schoolers, they take $6.3 million. That gives you $1 million to spend later, right? So your pick at 43 is worth 1.2 million, I think. Well, now that means you could sign a player for 2.2 million, which means you could get a top 25 guy and push him down there. And generally what that means is like, you kind of know what some of these guys are asking for, and you kind of call the agent and you're like, look, we're willing to go 2.8 million, but it's at pick 43. So then every team that wants to draft that guy before that, the agent's saying, look, you got 2.8. No, that's what it's going to take. And then that's how you essentially like float a player down the board. So the baseball draft's really weird. If you watch it and follow along, there's going to be guys that like MLB Pipeline has in their top 40 that are available in like round 5, round 6, round 7. You can't just pluck those guys because usually it means that they have a college commitment. They've asked for more money than teams are willing to pay them, and they're just not going to get taken. So, yeah, it is pretty interesting. I like looking back on the totality of the draft class and then stacking it by money too. So, because sometimes like your 11th or 12th rounder make a lot more money than your 7, 8, 9, 10. It's a little bit strange, but it's just how you have to like maneuver the bonus pool.
Well, and that goes back to, remember, AJ Brzezinski's point was the Sox before Mike Shirley were not stealing first round picks, meaning guys that at least have tremendous talent or would be a first round pick had they gone to college for 3 years and then came back out. You use that bonus money maybe to entice them to say, hey, give up college, come to us. Or, yeah, obviously, the guy fell and somehow you were able to convince him to come to you. So that would be nice to see the Sox be able to do that. Now, finally, is Getz, because obviously the GM does have a little bit of say in the drafting. It's usually in the first round. But is Getz and Shirley capable of stacking drafts like Robin Ventura, Jack McDowell, Frank Thomas, and Alex Fernandez? And I bring this up because the last time the Sox were this bad or this morbid was the late 80s. And then they stacked these 4 draft classes, I believe, in the first round together. And that turned around things in the 90s. And that just shows you how old I am.
Well, so I think it kind of depends on how good Colson Montgomery is, right? Like if Colson Montgomery is an all-star and Noah Schultz is an ace, then, I mean, look, I don't know if anybody's going to be Frank Thomas ever again, but that's a pretty good start. Like if you hit on this pick too, that's like 5 pretty solid draft classes in a row, but you're right as far as like, this is the way they're going to have to do it. Like they don't have an owner that's going to spend $300 million on players. Now, should you be able to sign like multiple free agents, for 80 million to 120, like when it's ready to win or whatever? Yeah, like you should be able to do that. No problem. But I think the smartest play here is like to start developing your own talent. They've done it like on the pitching side. Those guys have to prove it, obviously, but on the position player side, they need a lot more. I think that starts this July, hopefully.
Yeah, and I like how you brought that up with an owner not spending money. I don't know why Chris Getz, at least for the final thoughts here, why Chris Getz, though, then finally hasn't said, okay, because Jerry said it, I'll pay for scouts, get some more. I mean, yes, you want to have analysis and data on draft prospects, but the best way to do it too is at least with the high school guys is you got to be able to watch these guys. Draft, yeah, you can turn on ESPN Plus now.
Mm-hmm.
You can watch a lot of these guys, but you want to get eyes on the high school guys. I don't know why he has not convinced Jerry there's a return on your investment if you invest in the data and analytics and the scouting and the development needed, because guess what? You don't have to pay those guys a ton. And your draft prospects, like you said, you're talking about a $6 million signing bonus compared to, how he's loath to pay that shortstop hitting $200 million. I don't get why somebody hasn't convinced him that this is a good investment and you get a good return on your investment.
Yeah, it's just tough. I think their amateur scouting staff's pretty good. Like under Mike Shirley, like I think it's really good. And so that just like the only issue before was like just like random people making the first round picks like after the scouting department did all the work, right? That doesn't seem to really be happening. I don't think it's going to happen under Getz. I think he'll be on board, but I think this is going to be Mike Shirley's pick. The other thing with that is like the pro scouting has been a disaster for years. They hired an actual pro scouting like personnel director this year, Gene Watson from the Royals. I think the jury's out on like whether he's good or not, but there's somebody in that role, right? So they've like started to revamp that side a little bit. There's been a lot of roster churn. It's been something I've been happy with. Seen lots of names. Like if you're going to suck, like let's see lots and lots of guys, right? And I think we're about to see a lot more. So, they don't spend on analytics like other teams do. Obviously, that department needs to be much bigger. But on like the boots on the ground scouting side, like I think they're actually okay, definitely on the amateur side.
Yeah, I just hope that they try to convince them to say, hey, we could use some boots on the ground too. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's get the data and analytics because there's a better return on the investment. Well, James, thanks for joining me. Hopefully I'll have you on the show more. I'd like to get a lot of the Future Sox guys on because as I like to do a Monday minor league report, and I use you guys a lot. So I really appreciate the work you guys are doing at Future Sox.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm sure we could get you a guy. No problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, this wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Before I go, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV, on the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you, covering you 24/7. the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app, and I will be back tomorrow to discuss how Drew Thorpe did in his debut. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page at Locked On White Sox. Smash the like button and give a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to leave some comments on today's show, as I had James Allen as the guest, you can leave them on X, formerly Twitter, at ToddJDub, or at Locked On Sox, or email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. I will see you tomorrow.